The Vatican City, cloaked in mourning, stood still. Black banners swayed gently in the Roman breeze, the incense of farewell thick in the air. As thousands gathered beneath the vast dome of St. Peter's Basilica, there was only silence, broken, now and then by the slow toll of bells that marked the end of an era. Pope Francis, born Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the first pope from Latin America, had passed away. He was not just a pope to many. He was a spiritual father, a shepherd who carried the burdens of the Church with a smile, a limp and a deep sense of mercy. For over a decade, his voice called for compassion, humility, and reform. But now, that voice had been silenced. And yet, as the world wept and leaders offered their condolences, one man, Cardinal Peter Turkson, had remained silent. Throughout Pope Francis's decline in health, through his hospitalizations, through rumors and media flurries, Turkson had said nothing. No statement, no public comment, only presence. But on that fateful morning, as the sun gently lit the dome above the basilica, something changed. It was not during a press conference. It wasn't in an official statement. It wasn't even intended to be heard by many. But someone overheard it, a whisper, a quiet moment behind one of the many marble columns of the basilica, a deeply personal comment from Cardinal Turkson that shook even the most composed clergy. Members to their core. What did he say? He whispered, "They never let him rest, not in health, not in death." And now the weight he carried alone must finally be revealed. Those words weren't part of any prepared eulogy. They weren't planned. They came from a place of exhaustion, sorrow, and possibly guilt. And they opened a door into something deeper, something the Church had kept hidden from public view for a long time. Who were they? What was the weight that Pope Francis carried? And why did Cardinal Turkson, a man known for diplomacy, finally choose to say something now? As people tried to make sense of it, whispers began to fill the corridors of the Vatican. Whispers that Pope Francis, during his last year, had faced growing opposition from within the very walls of the institution he led. Whispers that certain reforms he wished to see through were blocked, delayed, or drowned in debate. And while his public image remained steady, kind, gentle, full of pastoral concern, the reality behind the scenes was far more complex. Cardinal Turkson had always been a quiet force in the Vatican. Born in Ghana, he was widely respected for his intellect, humility, and vision for a just world. At various points, he had been considered a likely successor to Francis. He had served as the prefect of the dicastery for promoting integral human development, a role deeply aligned with Pope Francis's focus on justice, care for the poor, and the environment. But over time, as internal tensions grew and political lines within the Curia deepened, Turkson began to pull back. Not because he disagreed with Francis, but perhaps because he saw too clearly what Francis was up against. In private, it said that Francis and Turkson often spoke late into the night, away from the eyes of press or protocol. They shared a bond, one rooted in faith, yes, but also in being outsiders. Francis, the Argentine Jesuit, who never quite fit into the Roman mold. Turkson, the African cardinal often praised in public, but sidelined when the power games of the Vatican grew intense. As 2024 turned into 2025, the Pope's health took a visible toll. He had undergone surgeries before, but now even short public appearances left him breathless. Still, he insisted on continuing his duties. He insisted on meeting pilgrims. He insisted on travel. And he insisted on preparing documents, letters, instructions, reforms he wanted seen through after his death. But according to those close to him, those instructions were met with silence by some and resistance by others. One particularly important issue Pope Francis was focused on was decentralizing church power. He wanted to give local bishops more authority in their regions rather than centralizing all control in Rome. It was controversial, to some even dangerous. Another point of contention was his continued openness to dialogue with other religions and cultures, especially Islam. While praised globally, certain factions within the Church saw it as compromising doctrine. The most sensitive issue, however, involved his consideration of allowing more married men to be ordained as priests in certain parts of the world. He never changed the rule universally, but he opened the conversation, and that in itself became explosive. Cardinal Turkson, who had long supported a church that listened before speaking, had watched the opposition grow, but even he did not expect the final days of Pope Francis's life to be marked by so much spiritual and political isolation. It wasn't that people abandoned Francis. Many still loved him. But according to sources close to the Vatican, when it became clear that he was drafting documents to be published after his passing, some within the hierarchy began pushing for access, edits, or complete withholding of those texts. There are even unconfirmed reports that in the last week of his life, Pope Francis requested a private moment with certain cardinals to deliver sealed envelopes, his final instructions. But not all of those envelopes reached their destination. This is what may have haunted Turkson. This is what may have pushed him to whisper those words. He knew the weight Francis had borne. He knew the battle behind the smile. And now, with Francis gone, the Church was at a crossroads once again. Publicly, the Vatican prepared a dignified farewell. A 9-day mourning period, liturgies, global, messages of condolences. But behind closed doors, the cardinals were preparing for the next conclave. Another pope had to be chosen, and with that, the future direction of the Church would be determined. Would the next pope continue the path Francis had carved, or would the Church turn back toward a more conservative structure? Turkson, many believed, would not run for pope, but that didn't mean he would stay silent. His whispered comment soon reached the ears of journalists. Vatican spokespeople tried to downplay it. A personal moment of grief, they said. Nothing more. But for many inside the Church and outside, it was clear. Turkson had seen something. He knew something. And his silence was no longer an option. In the following days, he appeared at a private mass, delivering a homily that was not officially televised, but was recorded by attendees. In it, he said, "Mercy is not weakness, reform is not rebellion, and silence in the face of injustice is not peace, it is abandonment." It was clear. He was speaking not just about the world, but about the Church itself. As the mourning period ended and the conclave drew closer, more questions began to rise. What would happen to the writings Pope Francis had prepared? Would they be published or buried? Some cardinals began to privately express support for releasing his final documents. Others warned it would be too divisive. The debate was growing. Meanwhile, millions of Catholics around the world prayed, not just for the soul of Pope Francis, but for the Church he had tried to reform, a Church that he believed should be closer to the poor, a Church that welcomed dialogue rather than division, a Church that listened. And yet the question lingered, was that vision too much for the Vatican to carry forward? Turkson, when asked directly about whether the documents would be published, said simply, "I hope the Church finds the courage to listen to the voice of a shepherd, even after he's gone." That hope now rests in the hands of those who walk the marbled halls of the Vatican, but it also rests with the faithful, with those who remember the Pope who kissed the feet of refugees, who washed the feet of prisoners, who said again and again, "Who am I to judge?" In death, Pope Francis had become a mirror reflecting the beauty and the cracks of the Church he served. Cardinal Turkson, once a quiet voice, had now become one of the few to speak the uncomfortable truth. He had broken the silence, not with anger, not with accusations, but with sorrow and honesty. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what the Church needs to hear now. Because in this moment of mourning, when incense rises and choirs chant ancient hymns, the real question isn't just who will be the next pope. The question is, who will carry forward the mission Francis began? Who will have the courage to speak when it's easier to stay silent? Who will protect the legacy when it's safer to forget? And who will remember the quiet whisper of a grieving cardinal behind the pillars of St. Peter's when he said, "They never let him rest, not in health, not in death." As history unfolds, that whisper may become a call that awakens the conscience of a Church still standing at the edge of change,